Hi guys, how you doing? Just out of Eddie Howe's news conference this morning. Firstly, he's given us very little indication as to which players are going to be available for the match against Luton tomorrow. He did say that Alexander Isak is 50-50 with his groin issue. But then said he has to make calls today on Kraft, who's got a deep cut on his shin, Anthony Gordon, who has a calf issue following that really bad challenge from Moises Caicedo on Tuesday night against Chelsea, and Eddie Howe actually said that he was really disappointed with the challenge, having watched it back. So you have to make a call on Gordon today. Likewise, Fabian Schär and Joe Linton, he said they both had scans. They weren't as serious as what they first feared. He says Joe Linton's probably slightly worse than Schär's, but again, a decision will be made on the two of those today. So as you can imagine, this is taking a theme here. And then finally I asked him about Sven Botman. He said, look, he came through the 45 well, we'll see how he is at training today. What I think we need to realise is that none of these guys are really training at the moment. The players who are playing every game are playing, recovering. So it's not like they came in the day after and they had a chance to train. They basically came in, did a bit of recovery, probably got a little bit of treatment, and then have a day off, and then they're back in again today. So that is why he probably isn't able to give us an answer until last minute. Also, I think Eddie Howe likes to keep his, as you all know by now, Eddie Howe likes to keep his cards close to his chest when it comes to injuries, so it leaves us guessing, but more importantly, so it leaves the opponents guessing. And I think that's probably why Eddie has his press conferences at 9 o'clock in the morning before training every week, so he can use that excuse of we'll see how they are at training. If his news conference had been at lunchtime, he probably needs to give us an answer. So sorry, we can't give you too much on those, but it sounds as though all of them are doubtful, and you have to say Gordon's one did look nasty the other night. I would be surprised if he's fully recovered, given the fact he was struggling to run towards the end. But what I want to talk about today is Lewis Hall. He was asked about it in his press conference today. Now, I missed the press conference last Friday, where I think there was a little bit of uncertainty as to what Eddie meant about Lewis Hall's situation, but there was a degree of certainty today, and he was asked basically why Lewis Hall hasn't been playing so much, and is it an issue with the number of appearances he needs to make to try and make the transfer permanent. And he rejected that and said that no, it's not to do with that. He said it's more to do with how he's developing as a player. He says he has settled in fine, he's working well behind the scenes. He says, but we still need to develop certain elements of his game. We're doing a lot of work on a daily basis with him behind the scenes, and my message to him and to the supporters would be to be patient, and that he does have a long-term future with the club, because obviously there's been a lot of questions asked. I just go onto my Twitter timeline to see lots of fans, a lot of my mates are asking as well why Lewis Hall isn't being used. I mean, I have to say I was amazed to see him not come off the bench the other night against Chelsea, given the fact that Newcastle were given dispensation for him to play out on their knees in the last few minutes. And you used Matt Ritchie but didn't use Lewis Hall. I'm not saying they should have picked Hall over Ritchie, but I wasn't sure why Hall didn't come on for maybe like Almiron towards the end. We know Almiron doesn't take penalties. Strange. And if you look at the matches that he has played, Lewis Hall this season, he's 7 appearances for Newcastle, and of the 4 starts that he's made, 3 of them he's come off after 45 minutes. He's come off at half time, which would suggest that's something that Eddie Howe doesn't do very often. That would suggest to me that he's not happy with what he's seeing from the player, and he's not putting in the right, whether it's amount of work, whether it's backtracking, whether it's defensive duties. He's not happy with that, and obviously, as we know, he sees him as a left back rather than a midfielder. He started at left back against Borussia Dortmund away, started at left back against Manchester City and was moved around a bit, and of course started at left back against Manchester United, also in the Carabao Cup, and scored that terrific goal. Lasted I think 75 minutes in that game. So yeah, the fact he's been brought off 3 times at half time out of 4 shows, I think, the message, what Eddie Howe feels. But he did underline that his long-term future is with the club, and he sees him as a Newcastle United player. It feels to me very similar to the Anthony Gordon situation, when he came in, wasn't playing to start with, was getting a couple of minutes here or there as he tried to get up to speed with the rest of the players. It looks very similar to that. But when Newcastle have been down to the bare bones that they have been the last few weeks, I'm amazed that he's not been used a little bit more. He came on against Fulham when the game was won, came on against Spurs when the game was lost. it feels like at this moment in time Eddie can't trust him. It feels like he can't trust him in his team. What I will say is it's my understanding that the loan obligation has nothing to do with appearances. I know a lot of people have been asking, is it because he needs to play a certain amount of games? As I say, he's made 7 appearances already, but the amount of games he plays has nothing to do with the transfer. So he could play, as I understand it, every game between now and the end of the season, or no games between now and the end of the season, and it doesn't affect the transfer. However, what Eddie did say this morning in his news conference is he said he hasn't quite hit the requirements yet to make the deal permanent, but he has a long-term future at the club. So, you know, my thoughts there, and just speaking to some of my colleagues in the press room, we think it might be something to do with Newcastle need to stay in the division this season, or they need to reach a certain amount of points or something like that. I don't think it's anything to do with the minutes or the appearances that he plays, and I've had that bottomed out from a couple of sources. So yeah, it sounds as though it's simply just Eddie Howe doesn't feel he's ready to perform the role that he needs from him in the team, and rather than putting him in for the sake of it, he'd rather play a player who's tiring, who does know defensively what they need to do. That's how it would appear to me. The fact that he's been brought off 3 times at half time out of 4, and the fact that his minutes are getting less and less. But as I say, he did say he expects him to have a long-term future at the football club. What are you laughing at? So that was Mick the groundsman just putting me off there midway through that video, and I thought it could have been worse, so at least that's all that was. But anyway, yeah guys, that's it for today. So trip to Luton tomorrow for Newcastle. We'll find out obviously tomorrow, team news, as to which of those players are going to make it. But Eddie being as evasive, I think, as he has ever been this morning, but giving us some clarity on the Lewis Hall situation. So it feels to me like Lewis Hall will be a Newcastle player next season, irrespective of what happens, but he just needs to prove himself to the manager, and he hasn't done that yet. As I say, probably similar to the Anthony Gordon situation last week, but still surprising for many of us given the injury situation Newcastle have got, that he hasn't played even for fleeting 10-15 minutes, or if he doesn't trust him defensively, even play him further up the pitch. But anyway, I digress. But good to speak to you, and as ever, leave your comments below, and I will speak to you after the Luton game. Cheers.